Mosaic, a daily news program from Worldlink TV, presents a selection of news reports from independent and state-controlled broadcasters from throughout the Middle East.
The appointed Palestinian Prime Minister Mahmoud Abbas notes that his negotiations with the Palestinian president have failed, reiterating that he does not intend to bring up this issue again. Now to our correspondent in Ramallah, Majid Saeed.
Last-minute pressure on Yasser Arafat came to the benefit of Abu Mazen, who does not have enough time to add the final touches to his government. Nevertheless, there still remains hope, despite beliefs that he was going to be removed, especially since many people are counting on the final decision.
The UN Secretary-General Kofi Annan declares in Austria that serious negotiations are taking place at the Security Council to resume the export of Iraqi oil.
I think that the June 3rd review initially aimed at presenting the Oil for Food program. The issue of lifting the sanctions was discussed, and I believe that the sanctions will be lifted one day. I hope that the Security Council will focus on what is needed to lift the sanctions.
Head of the civil U.S. administration in Iraq, Jay Garner, held talks with the leader of Kurdistan's Patriotic Union, Jalal al-Talibani, in Sulaymaniyah. This is his first communication with an Iraqi politician. Iraqi Shiites in Karbala commemorate Imam Hussein ibn Ali for the first time in many years. Now to our correspondent there, Amr Abdul Hamid.
On the anniversary of commemorating Imam al-Hussein, the celebrations here in the holy sites in Karbala have reached their peak. Hundreds of thousands of Iraqi Shiites did not miss the chance to celebrate this event after many years of being deprived of doing so.
This is the end of the news in brief. Sheikh Mohammed al-Fartusi was released after the U.S. forces arrested him during his trip from Baghdad to Karbala. He was accompanied by 3 other religious figures. In an exclusive interview with Abu Dhabi TV, Sheikh al-Fartusi declared that the treatment of the U.S. forces was worse than that of Saddam Hussein's treatment of religious scholars in the past.
Our detention by the Americans was actually worse than Saddam's detention of religious students. They beat us. So when we asked the soldier who was guarding us for anything, he would refuse. They denied us the most basic of things, such as movement or leaning on our arms. That was prohibited. My friends from the office and I, as well as my brother who was driving, in addition to 3 of my friends, we were handcuffed to the back and could not move at all. We stayed awake till the next morning. We were thrown into the prison cells with the guard standing over us. Anyways, at the end, they tossed my turban off, and I'm wearing my friend's turban as proof of that. One of the Americans kicked the turban, and when I responded strongly, the leader of the group came and apologized. Anyway, they did what they wanted, and it is really horrific. In any case, despite their treatment, none of our mindful men used their weapons in the face of the Americans. This time they passed it, but next time only God knows what will happen if public anger is provoked.
Meanwhile, Iraq's capital, Baghdad, is relatively calm, surrounded by caution. As life is returning back to normal, there are reports that indicate that a number of religious figures and academics were detained, including Sheikh Mohammed al-Fartusi, who is now released and head of the Organization for Iraqi Intellects. Now from Baghdad, Mohammed Mukhtari.
At 11 o'clock in the morning, Iraqi time, A troop of U.S. Marines attacked the national headquarters of the Organization for Iraqi Intellects, arresting the organization's director while he was in a meeting with organizers.
They shamelessly entered the room, took Dr. Satam, who founded this organization, and invited all the intellectuals. They took him from among us, handcuffed him, and put him in a military vehicle.
The party organizers say that the arrest of Satan al-Qaud came after confrontations between him and one of the checkpoint inspectors, who is not American nor governmental. This morning, these inspectors were wearing army uniforms and carrying weapons, checking passing cars. Who do you belong to?
I belong to Dr. Ahmed Ali Chalabi.
What are you doing here?
Searching for stolen cars or weapons. It is our duty, and if God is willing, we will free Iraq. Thank God the situation is under control.
At the headquarters of the Kurdistan Democratic Party in central Baghdad, which used to be the headquarters for Iraqi intelligence, another Marine troop confiscated a large number of files and pictures found in secret offices. Rallies and demonstrations are now becoming a custom in the Iraqi capital. Amidst this atmosphere, respect is lost, even when stopping for the red light, whether it was the Americans or the city's residents. This is the daily life on the streets of Baghdad. Clashes, confrontations, and demonstrations. Everyone in their own way is looking for a solution to rid Iraq of its current situation. For Abu Dhabi Television, Mohammed Makhtari, downtown Baghdad.
From Baghdad to Karbala, where hundreds of thousands of Iraqi Shiites are commemorating the martyrdom of Imam Hussein ibn Ali. The people are happy to participate in this event after many decades of not being able to.
Hundreds of thousands of Shiites headed to Karbala on a journey of faith to a celebration of one of their most important religious holidays, and it is commemorating Imam Hussein ibn Ali. Crowds of people whipping themselves and their bodies bleed as they chant praises to Imam al-Hussein, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, grandson. Close by is the Golden Dome, where Imam al-Hussein is buried, and it is the destination of Shiites. These celebrations were prohibited under the previous secular regime. This is the first time since 1972 that these men are able to practice these rituals on the streets of Karbala, pledging their loyalty to Imam Hussein and expressing their sadness over his murder. The Shiites hope to define their presence through the crowds of hundreds of thousands of people in order not to be marginalized again in Iraq. Chains to whip the backs, hands hitting the chest, cheeks being slapped, followed by crawling on all fours. An Iraqi Shiite event being celebrated after the Iron Fist has disappeared.
Today I came for Ali Hussein, the first day in 30 years. We haven't seen this day. We came walking from Al-Thawra.
The citizens of Karbala know that the participation of the Shiite religious figures adds a political undertone to the event. Shiite roots go back to the murder of Imam Ali and his son Imam Hussein. Imam Hussein was killed during the Karbala battle. Shiites commemorate the event on the occasion of the 40th, which means 40 days after the murder of Imam Hussein. After a week of talks between the United States and Syria, there are positive signs of dialogue between officials from the two countries. The U.S. president eased his position on Damascus, and the Syrian foreign minister was pleased. However, President Assad, who met with the Spanish foreign minister in Damascus, reiterated Syria's reasoning behind its position regarding the developments in Iraq. He drew attention to his discussion about the issue of Palestine, saying that Syria will respect any Palestinian decision.
The latest differences that occurred between Syria and the United States are not considered a departure from past directions they have taken. While confrontations escalated between the two countries, most are used to seeing these differences reflected in their policies, as the United States would often increase or decrease its involvement in the problems of the region and the Arab-Israeli conflict. And each time the Zionist lobby would try to pull Washington towards increasing its bias towards the Jewish state. The latest wave of confrontations between Syria and Washington are not considered a change in the customary relationship between the two sides. After a week of negotiations focused on the recent developments in Iraq, the relationship between the two countries improved, at least in front of the world. This may mean that differences still remain. The Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, who met with Spanish Foreign Minister Ana Palacio in Damascus, expressed his desire that the United Nations play an active role in peacekeeping operations around the world. However, this role will be shaped by Washington's efforts to prolong its occupation of Iraq. President Assad reiterated Syria's position on Iraq. He stressed the need to protect Iraq's territorial integrity and peace, and that the Iraqi people decide who represents them, emphasizing that Syria will support any position which serves the interests of the Iraqi people and maintains Iraq's self-determination. Regarding the Arab-Israeli conflict, the President expressed an unprecedented position, confirming that Syria will agree to whatever the Palestinians decide. He said that Syria's position is clear, and that is the return of the occupied Golan Heights. The Syrian Foreign Minister Farouk al-Shara commented on these positive developments and mentioned U.S. President George Bush's statements regarding Syria, leaving positive impressions in Damascus. In a joint press conference with the spokesperson from Spain, Shara expanded upon the remarks made by Bush, saying that Damascus has begun to show signs of cooperation. Shara expressed his hope that these remarks indicate the beginning of an open and honest discourse between the two countries. He said that Syria has always wanted an open dialogue with the United States and has not discussed any confrontation or escalation, adding that this will not change. He confirmed that his country is for a comprehensive and just peace in the Middle East. Regarding the issue of Iraq, the Syrian minister denied statements by the Iraqi National Congress that Saddam's brother-in-law surrendered to the organization after returning from Syria. However, he said that Iraqis from now on will not cross the Iraqi-Syrian border without having a visa issued from Damascus. The foreign minister of Spain confirmed that her country does not agree with statements opposing Syria, saying she considers some of them unuseful. She added that Syria's dealings with the United Nations were both responsible and pragmatic. In addition, Palacio said that Madrid will not mediate between the United States and Syria, adding that the relationship between the two countries does not require that. Palacio stated that she sees a change in Syria's position regarding the peace process in the Middle East, with the hope to encourage Syria's government to support the roadmap drafted by the Quartet Committee.
U.S. U.S. General Jay Garner held his first talks with a Kurdish leader since launching his mission in Iraq, meeting Jalal Talabani of the Patriotic Union of Kurdistan on Tuesday in the northern city of Sulaymaniyah. The 64-year-old retired general, the U.S. administrator of occupied Iraq, and his team were due to move on later to northern Iraq's main city, Mosul. Garner was warmly received by the Kurdish leader, in contrast to his Monday arrival in Baghdad, where the United States is facing mounting anger. The north of Iraq has been ruled by the PUK and another pro-US Kurdish faction, the Kurdistan Democratic Party, headed by Masoud Barzani, since the aftermath of the 1991 Gulf War. Barzani and Talabani called Tuesday for a major meeting in Baghdad of leading opposition movements to prepare for a transitional administration. The U.S. governor of occupied Iraq, Jay Garner, said that he could not guarantee a transfer of power to an elected Iraqi government within 3 months. Meanwhile, the head of the Foreign Relations Committee in the U.S. Congress, Senator Richard Lugar, said that it would take at least 5 years to form a government in Iraq. But what is clear is that the duration of the U.S. occupation of the country remains vague. This report has more.
How long will the U.S. governor of occupied Iraq, General Jay Garner, remain in power? This question is on the mind of Iraqis who spared no time to raise their voice against U.S. occupation.
Yes, a humiliation, a complete humiliation. They said they came as liberators. What liberation? This is an occupation. It is not a liberation. They are supposed to provide us with a better life.
For the Arab world as well, it is very painful to have a country like Iraq being governed by a foreign power so many years after the end of colonialism. A controversial figure for both his pro-Israeli stance and relations with the military industry, Garner was quick to visit a hospital and other civilian infrastructure in an attempt to show that he is in Iraq for the goodwill of the Iraqis and not for the pure U.S. interests. But how long will he stay? Garner said that he would not guarantee a transfer of power to an elected Iraqi government within 3 months, adding that he would not put 90 days as a mark on the wall and that U.S. forces will be in Iraq as long as it takes. The head of the Foreign Relations Committee in the U.S. Congress, Senator Richard Lugar, earlier said that it would take at least 5 years to form a government in Iraq. U.S. Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld, however, contradicted Lugar's statement and said on Monday there was little likelihood of a long-term U.S. military presence in Iraq, and the emergence of what Rumsfeld called a friendly government in Baghdad could be a reason to reduce U.S. forces in the region. Rumsfeld was also responding to a weekend report in the New York Times that quoted unnamed senior Bush administration officials as saying the United States is planning a long-term military relationship with the future government of a post-Saddam Hussein Iraq. The Times said this relationship would grant the United States access to perhaps 4 military bases at the international airport outside Baghdad, Al-Talil near Nasiriyah in the south, at an airstrip called H1 in western Iraq, and at the Bashur airfield in Kurdish north. Rumsfeld said the chances of permanent bases were so low that the subject had not been discussed in his presence. He also acknowledged that the U.S. was reconsidering its military footprint in the region.
And there has been zero discussion among senior Bush administration officials, the way I define senior, on that subject. We literally have not even considered that. Now, what is going on? There are 4 bases that the U.S. is using in that country to help bring in humanitarian assistance, to help provide for stability operations. And are they doing that? Sure. But does that have anything to do with a long-term footprint? Not a whit.
Rumsfeld added that the United States plans, however, to hold discussions with other governments in the region about changes in the U.S. military footprint in the region, and that he expected significant changes.
In Lebanon, Hezbollah MP Mohammed Ra'ad said the U.S. threats against Syria aims at weakening the morale of Damascus and imposing psychological and political pressure. His words came during a ceremony marking the 7th anniversary of the El Mansouri massacre, when an Israeli warplane targeted a family that was fleeing the 1996 Israeli aggression against Lebanon in an ambulance. Later, Al-Mahdi scouts held a march towards the town cemetery where the martyrs were buried.
The Americans are quite aware of the Syrian support for the Lebanese people and its right to resist the Israeli occupation in Lebanon. They want to anticipate the matters and to fail this stance. So they set up unachievable conditions, and while betting on a certain weakness, the American negotiator interferes because it would be easier to proclaim concessions. But there are fixed stances, and the brave leadership in Syria does not give up on them, and there is a strong commitment to pursue this course because it's the sole guarantee for the existence of a strong Syria in the region.
Diplomats from the United States, North Korea and China prepare to meet in Beijing on Wednesday in a bid to resolve North Korea's nuclear development and the anxiety it has caused throughout the region. On Tuesday, delegations from North Korea and the US arrived in the Chinese capital for tomorrow's talks.
Washington's Asia envoy James Kelly arrived in Beijing Tuesday for crisis talks with North Korea and China. Kelly, Assistant Secretary of State for Asia and Pacific Affairs, was accompanied by a high-powered delegation of senior Washington officials. The talks, scheduled to start Wednesday and last until Friday, will be the first opportunity for U.S. and North Korean officials to meet face-to-face since the crisis erupted in October, when Kelly accused the North of launching a program to enrich uranium in contravention of a 1994 anti-nuclear pact. The United States wants to persuade the North Koreans about closing down its nuclear programs, while the North wants assurances the United States will not attack it. Earlier, a North Korean delegation headed by Lee Gun, Deputy Director General of the American Affairs Bureau of Pyongyang's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, have arrived in Beijing for talks with U.S. officials to discuss the North Korean crisis. China will send Fu Ying, Director General of the Asian American Bureau at the Foreign Ministry, to the talks. Despite these steps forward, the commander of United States forces in South Korea, General Leon Laporte, described North Korea as a thorn to the passage of the peace in the region during a forum on Tuesday organized by South Korean rightist civic group. General Laporte commands the 37,000 U.S. troops based in South Korea.
Today, the current military demarcation line between North and South Korea is the most heavily armed in the world, and it remains an arena for potential confrontation. North Korea's military poses many threats to global stability. Adding to the increased tensions is the fact that North Korea has not shown sincere attempts to address these threats to peace with the international community.
An Australian report said Tuesday the Pentagon has produced detailed plans to bomb North Korea's nuclear plant at Yongbyon if the Stalinist state goes ahead with reprocessing of spent nuclear fuel rods. The second plan, contained in a classified memo reportedly circulated by Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld, argues that Washington's goal should be the collapse of Kim Jong-il's regime. The reports come as confusion prevails over the ambiguous statements issued by Pyongyang last week about whether it has begun reprocessing 8,000 spent fuel rods or merely completed preparations to do so. Australian Foreign Minister Alexander Downer said Tuesday that Canberra also believed Pyongyang's statement claiming it had begun processing the fuel rods, saying it had been mistranslated.
And European Union have weighed in behind Palestinian Prime Minister-designate Mahmoud Abbas amid differences between him and President Yasser Arafat on key posts. With a self-imposed deadline for agreement on a cabinet due to expire tomorrow, EU Mideast envoy Miguel Moratinos told Arafat the EU would accept no one but Abbas, also known as Abu Mazen, as prime minister. Palestinian politicians have called on Abbas to put together a new administration and meet the deadline. Hanging in the balance is a US-backed peace roadmap that envisions an end to Palestinian-Israeli conflict and creation of a Palestinian state by 2005. Washington has made its presentation of the peace package conditional on the installation of a new Palestinian government that it hopes will pursue democratic reforms.
Well, the future of the roadmap is up to Israel and the Palestinians. Those are the parties that will determine the acceptance of the roadmap. The quartet was helpful, of course, in producing the roadmap. We worked with the quartet on the roadmap. The roadmap will hopefully be offered soon to the parties as soon as the Palestinians are able to move forward with the confirmation of their new cabinet. And then it'll be a matter for the Israelis and the Palestinians to move forward productively.
Meanwhile, Spain says a Madrid II Middle East conference is a possibility. Foreign Minister Ana Palacio said Spain would like to host Arab states and Israel at a second landmark Middle East peace conference in 12 years. Diplomats said any talk of such a conference was premature, with so much work to do, but they said it made sense to involve world players who could widen political support. They said Egypt and Britain might also want to host such a gathering. The conference appears likely as the quartet of the United States, Russia, the United Nations, and the European Union is eager to publish its roadmap for Middle East peace. Spanish Prime Minister José María Aznar will meet British Prime Minister Tony Blair in London tomorrow.
The American Secretary of State Colin Powell said that his country will not allow the UN to have an essential or central role in administrating or rebuilding Iraq politically or economically. In a televised interview, Powell said that the countries that led the war on Iraq are the ones that should have the major role to engage Iraq with the international community.
The American officials are proud of what they call the military victory over the Iraqi forces and the liberation of Iraq from Saddam's regime. The American president, the commander-in-chief who is responsible for this victory, talks about the stunning victory on every occasion.
Committed our troops because I believe
We committed our troops because I believed that Saddam's regime was a threat against the American people and all freedom-loving people. We achieved that goal, and we liberated the Iraqi people. We believe that freedom is a humane principle and God's gift to every human being, regardless of his race and religion.
It's a gift from the Almighty God for every person, regardless of their race or their religion.
However, day after day, the hidden motives of the U.S. invasion of Iraq are being disclosed. The U.S. officials are claiming that the war was intended to bring democracy, peace and freedom and nothing else. But their statements are contradictory to facts on the ground, which reveal that Washington is primarily concerned with its political and economic interests. The American Secretary of State Colin Powell repeatedly said that the United States does not want to interfere in Iraq's internal affairs. However, he talks about indirectly intervening by supporting Washington-backed candidates to help them obtain political positions in Iraq, such as Ahmad Chalabi, the president of the Iraqi National Congress.
It's up to the Iraqis to decide who will be their leader.
It is up to the Iraqis to choose their leaders. Mr. Chalabi is a well-known person because he put his heart and mind in this struggle for many years.
Powell's frankness in supporting his Iraqi allies crossed the line when he said that Washington does not want to talk about the idea that the United Nations should take a central role, as was expressed by Moscow, Berlin, and Paris. He also said that Washington does not want to talk about the need to take into consideration the interests of these countries because the United States has the right to manage Iraq and utilize its resources.
We paid a political price, and the price in lives, in order to create a democratic government in Iraq, and thus we should have the right to take a strategic role.
However, Powell tried to calm international opinion by saying that Washington is not trying to repeat what happened in Iraq and that the war against Saddam's regime was against terrorism. Powell said that he does not mean that the U.S. will invade other countries like what happened in Iraq, but they have economic, political, and diplomatic plans.
Mosaic is made possible by a grant from the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, which promotes journalism excellence worldwide and invests in the vitality of 26 U.S. communities, and the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. Additional support provided by Henry and Virgilia Dakin.